Welcome, fellow and future metalheads, to The Metal Substance, a series about metal music and its history, created for the long-term goal of eventually funding the creation of a seasonal city metal philharmonic. I'm your host, call me Victor. Today we are talking about what I call metal's bridge era. You could maybe call it metal's dark age, whatever. The point, though, of this video is I wanted to talk about a period that exemplifies how metal did not evolve in a straight line and in fact went through a period of decline in the 1970s, particularly the late 1970s, until its resurgence and burst in popularity in the 1980s, when thrash metal in particular is going to lead this explosion in popularity. So I just wanted to take a few minutes to discuss this era of metal history before I do some individual videos talking about albums from this period. The bands and albums I'll be mentioning here, I'm of course not going to go into a terrible, great detail because, they'll probably get their own videos. So, in order to understand this trough in metal's history, we have to look at the landscape. It's broadly agreed that heavy metal in the late 1960s, early 1970s was forged out of the work of three bands in particular: Led Zeppelin, Deep Purple, and of course Black Sabbath. By the mid-1970s, these bands were not the flagship bearers of the genre that they had been before. All three bands were becoming more technical, more experimental, expansive, progressive. This is sort of the eternal curse and blessing of pioneers. The same forces that lead them to create and innovate their styles in the first place are the same forces that prevent them from ever settling into a convenient boxer style. So the 1970s is a period of transformation of heavy metal, when it goes from something no one can agree on, like is this blues, is it psychedelic, it's industrial, is it rock, but there's just more speed and gain. And it's in this period that metal is going to actually become a subculture with its own ethos and global presence. It's going to create the launching pad for the enormous leap forward in the 1980s that metal will take. So who's carrying the torch forward in the later half of the 1970s, influencing the groups that will take metal to unimagined peaks in the 1980s? There's a few that I think are worth understanding. What you have to understand first is that proto and early heavy metal was extremely influenced by blues and the blues scale. This is particularly evident in the Mississippi Delta blues at work in the first four Led Zeppelin albums and the riffs and rhythm of Black Sabbath. However, in the 70s, bands that we would now call metal start expanding the soundscape in a couple of ways. The first is by literally increasing the velocity and speed of the music. The second is by pulling on more complicated scales from the European music traditions. So, for the second point, the band Judas Priest is the most clear example of this change. Their first album, Rockarola, or Rock'n'Rolla, was released in 1974 and has clear blues influences. Their second album, Sad Wings of Destiny, 50 years, begins this transition towards extreme metal. Vocalist Rob Halford is using more complex melodies. The drumming is becoming more defined by the double kick bass, and KK Downing and plus Glenn Tipton's twin guitar attacks are showing more possibilities of sound than Tony Iommi could do on his own from Black Sabbath. And by the time we get to 1978's album Stay in Class, which had songs like Exciter, Judas Priest is functionally engaging in proto-thrash metal. In fact, when talking about how Stay in Glass was speeding up the sound of early heavy metal, this is what bassist Ian Hill had to say, quote, "It was a gradual process. A lot of people seem to think it happened overnight, that suddenly it was there, and it wasn't. It was something that evolved. With Simon Phillips and Les Binks with the double bass drums and all that, it gave way to the faster tempos and stuff like Exciter, which is a hallmark of heavy metal music," end quote. And when we go beyond the literal music, Rob Halford's style, incorporating leather, studs, chains, etc., starts to become the universal uniform of the metalhead from his influence. So also during this time period, Deep Purple's guitarist Ritchie Blackmore split from the band and formed Ritchie Blackmore's Rainbow. Rainbow paired Ritchie with Ronnie James Dio, who would become one of metal's most recognizable singers, cited as the popularizer of the devil's horn, hand sign that can be seen at any metal show around the world now. Rainbow fused medieval influenced lyrics, Ritchie's take on Baroque music, and the voice of Ronnie James Dio to create one of metal's most enduringly influential works. It's continued with follow-up albums Rising and Long Live Rock and Roll. It's quite revealing how they were still calling what we now know as metal rock and roll. So, in other words, Rainbow was a roaring, resident, radiant revelation forged by Ritchie Blackmore's relentless resolve and raised to regal heights by the remarkable Ronnie James Dio. Rising from hard rock's roots, they reshaped the realm with righteous riffs, roaring rhythms, and rich romantic fantasy. From Man on the Silver Mountain to Stargazer, they reached beyond reality, revealing realms of wizards, rainbows, and rebellion. Their records rekindled imagination while reinforcing the raw power of heavy metal. Their resonance rippled across the rising ranks of metal, rewarding future rulers of power metal, neoclassical metal, and British heavy metal with a roadmap of refinement and raw force. Remember then the remarkable reign of Ritchie and Ronnie, two revered revolutionaries whose relentless resolve remade rock, reminding every restless renegade that greatness rarely arrives by restraint. Raise your horns, respect Rainbow, rejoice in the revolution. Now, this United Kingdom sound extended beyond its borders. Out in Ireland, you had Thin Lizzy also engaging in twin guitar dynamics. Definitely, they're going to have their own video at some point. The Scorpions were rejecting the krautrock sound of their native Germany in favor of an American and UK influenced style of rock and roll. It's In Trance, for example, heavily pulls on Jimi Hendrix, who was an American who mostly operated in the UK for his famous years. Punk rock was also starting to rise during this time, especially by the time we get to 1976, 1977. You've got the Sex Pistols, The Clash, and others who are rejecting arena rock in favor of shorter songs, fast songs. It's aggressive, it's DIY, meaning do it yourself. Aesthetic and everything is DIY. The production, the performance, the fashion, and it's explicitly anti-establishment. So while the United Kingdom becomes a bit of an intubating tank for heavy metal, around the world it's also evolving very rapidly. If you look at North America during this time, several bands that are still famous are getting their start in terms of popular bands, where there was Kiss and Alice Cooper delivering arena performances that have become legendary. They're developing the theatrical elements of metal with the face paint and the pyro, and it's like you're going to a horror movie. All these things they're going to make going to a metal concert just as important as listening to a record at home for a cultural metalhead. And Blue Oyster Cult is creating metal for intellectuals. Heavy guitar riffs, sharp drumming, cryptic lyrics inspired by sci-fi and fantasy. It's a darker tone than Kiss. So you have to understand there's almost a double music movement going on. The big and bold acts that are going to eventually become arena and stadium fillers, and the more technical, the DIY-focused underground. Incidentally, I'm not trying to say that either of these is right or wrong. Many bands are going to go back and forth, or just look at like what Judas Priest is now. I don't think they could have ever imagined they'd get there. Anybody could have imagined that Judas Priest would be that popular in its early days. And, I have to talk about a band, even though I don't personally like them. Van Halen. Van Halen's going to release their self-titled debut album in 1978. Eddie Van Halen's two-handed tapping technique is going to start becoming a plague upon guitar shops and teenage bedrooms. So, and then up in Canada, progressive rock legends Rush are releasing 2112, which is a non-metal album, sort of, but not really. But it's going to go on to severely influence progressive metal and the creation of concept albums, especially the space-themed ones. All right, now I can hear you screaming. Don't worry, we're going back to the UK because we need to talk about Motorhead. You see, Rush is saying, oh, we wrote a song about a man without a guitar and you can't play it without breaking the law. And the Scorpions, not the Scorpions. Scorpions are interested in sexiness. Judas Priest are trying to show off their bona fides, the neoclassical stylings, the sophistication, the technicality of Rainbow. Let me introduce Lemmy Kilmister, aka God, who forms a band called Motorhead. Here's the short and skinny on Motorhead. Lemmy, aka Ian Kilmister, was fired from the band Hawkwind after he got arrested on a drug possession charge. He attempts to form a new band called Motorhead after the last song he wrote for Hawkwind, and eventually settles on a trio of himself, Phil Taylor on the drums, aka Filthy Animal, and the guitarist Eddie Clark. And after some difficulties getting a record out, they eventually are able to officially release a debut album, the self-titled Motorhead, in August of '77. This album is a combination of the distortion and volume of heavy rock and early heavy metal, but fused with the speed and pure aggression of punk rock. Now, in a time when so much of the music in the UK was about these huge, self-important guitar solos, about romanticism, everything's literature, and it's classy, it's sophisticated, Motorhead is singing about gambling and war and going fast and the rock and roll lifestyle. They're creating the soundtrack to bar fights. And from here, Motorhead is going to go on to be extremely successful and influential in the continued development of heavy metal, a label, I should say, that Lemmy never, as far as I'm aware, ever liked. He always said they were fundamentally a rock and roll band. So by 1979, they're going to release Overkill, whose title track has a double bass part that's going to be directly cited by later thrash drummers as influencing them, such as Anthrax's drummer. And they then release the album Ace of Spades, which is going to peak at number 4 on the UK charts and becomes an anthem for both metal and punk rockers, turning them into an international phenomenon. Motorhead has since become one of those bands. If you're a metalhead, but then you say, "Oh yeah, I don't like Motorhead. I don't know. I think I gotta check your badge or check for your badge or something. You know, what's going on? Are you Aspire? Are you a Spook? You kind of glowy? What are you doing here at the show, man?" So anyway, this bridge period of metal that I've been describing, if I had to say when this bridge ends, it would be in 1979. I say kind of going into 1980. By 1980, it's definitely over. But I say 1979 because it's in May of 1979 that a journalist, Jeff Barton, coins the term new wave of British heavy metal to describe the grassroots bands that have been coming up at the time. And so 79, 78, we transition into the new wave of British heavy metal for a few years, which is itself going to lead into thrash metal. And thrash metal is going to truly explode metal as a culture. But I think the truly global metal era, global big era of the 1980s, that's thrash metal. But it's only able to happen because of the foundations laid in the 1970s bridge era. So as for the new wave of British heavy metal, which will get its own video, I just want to say that it is hard to say that it hadn't already started by 1979. Some people might argue this entire bridge period that I'm talking about is itself supposed to be part of the new wave of British heavy metal. But I think 1980 is definitively when it's off to the races, because you're going to see the release of Judas Priest's British Steel, Black Sabbath with Ronnie James Dio fronting it, their Heaven and Hell album. Ozzy Osbourne is going to go on his solo career. He's going to release Wizard of Oz with Randy Rhoads on guitar. And Motorhead's releasing Ace of Spades, which is maybe the only album that metalheads and punk rockers can agree that they all like. And there's also Saxon's Wheels of Steel. But the full story of the new wave of British heavy metal will have to wait for the video. Thank you for joining me. If you liked this video, don't forget to like and subscribe and share the video. It helps out a lot. Don't forget that there's no substitute to listening to the albums yourselves. And remember that history will be written by the victor.